We are so excited to tell you guys that we have added Friday, March 28th to our Come Back to Christ event. So if you weren't able to get tickets for Saturday, you can come on Friday, March 28th. Go to our website, comebackpodcast.org/events, and you can get tickets there. Saturday sold out really fast. So if you're interested in coming, you're going to want to go to our website quickly and get your tickets. Also have to give a shout out to Mike at mikesAutoShack.com. He is one of our amazing sponsors, and this event could not have happened without our sponsors. So Mike goes to the dealer-only auction in Las Vegas, and he purchases newer vehicles, many with full factory warranties, for a set price of $1,500. So you can learn all about his business at mikesAutoShack.com. Mike is a huge fan of the podcast, and we are so grateful for you, Mike.
Okay, Marcy, I am so excited to have you on the podcast. It's kind of fun to have somebody on that has background in mental health and works as a therapist. So excited to have you on.
Yes, thank you. I'm excited to be on, honestly.
Tell me a little bit about like your work and just some background about you.
So I am a clinical social worker. I'm the director of clinical services for a community mental health center in rural Iowa. I have offices in 3 separate towns that cover 3 counties. So we're all spread out, but this is rural, the Midwest. This is kind of how it is. And we do all sorts of things. We offer therapy, medication management, community support, peer support, ketamine. We do a lot of different things here. So
Cool.
Yeah, we're a one-stop shop because that's how it has to be in rural work. You do it all.
Right. Well, awesome. I am excited to hear your story. So let's go ahead and jump in and start at the beginning.
I had been thinking about this since I got your email, and I was like, gosh, where do I start? Because I was a rowdy teenager. Looking back, I think that I had some depression. I think I really was sort of like just struggling, as a lot of young kids do, especially young girls. And when I was in high school, I was dating a guy, and he was killed in a car accident. And so
Oh my gosh.
that kind of sent me through just like a dark space. And I ended up getting a new young women's president. And she was so amazing in so many ways. And she was a convert to the church, as most people around here are. She did everything to kind of reach me. I remember her coming to my work and wanting me just to sit outside in her car and just relating to me. And she had lost her boyfriend in high school, had died in a car accident too. It was just like crazy how all of those things there's just so much relatability there. And she was telling me she went to a Jimi Hendrix concert when she was young. So of course then I was like, all right, she's cool.
Yeah.
She gets it. She was just relatable and loved me where I was. And so I think that kind of helped me to sort of get out of that funk and brought me back to where I needed to be as far as like my spirituality was going. I live in a town now about 25 miles from where I grew up. And so I still attend the ward that I live in because like it's a town of about 6,000. We're like the only LDS family that lives here.
Mm-hmm.
So even now. And like my son just graduated, and he was the first LDS kid to ever graduate from the high school here. So,
Oh my gosh.
you're just kind of on your own when it comes to that. You really have to kind of stand on your own 2 feet as far as that goes. So of course I was really excited to go to Utah because going to Utah to me meant like being around people that were on the same path as me. And I don't know, it's like for the first time in my life, I thought like I could relate to people as far as like my religion went. And that was exciting to me. I graduated early from high school, actually, and I was 17 and I moved out to Provo, and I was living in BYU housing. I ended up getting put into an apartment. It was 6 girls into this apartment, and 4 of the 6 of us were all from like the same small town in southern Utah. And so they all knew each other. So not only did I feel different because I was different, and I had gone through a lot in my short 17 years, that there was a lot of life experience that the other girls I just hadn't had yet, and good for them. I mean, that's not a bad thing to be able to still be a kid, but when you feel kind of broken, and I mean, that was just hard for me. So I remember being in the BYU ward and kind of being like, what is wrong with these people?
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I was in the Twilight Zone because I'm like, okay, I cuss and I'm rowdy and like I do not fit here, and I just didn't feel like I belonged. Not only did I felt different, but I could tell that other people saw that I was different. I'm having these experiences. I'm really not feeling like I'm fitting in. I'm struggling to find my place. And unfortunately, I think I was not leaning into the right places. What I should have been doing is, of course, going to the Lord and seeking Him, but I think I was seeking connection in people. I was just looking at the wrong place. Like, these are people that are human beings that are flawed, and I'm just looking at all of my flaws, and they seem like they're perfect, and they don't shocked if I say the wrong thing, or I'm silly in the wrong ways, or I'm loud, and I'm country. Like, that's how it is here. So I think the straw that sort of broke the camel's back for me was this moment. This poor girl, she was my visiting teacher, and she was very sweet, but it came to me in like this weird way and she was like, I just feel like you need to repent, and you need to go to the bishop and talk to him, and basically calling me to repent. I was looking for a reason to be offended. Let's be real,
Right.
And so I was like, that's it. I'm done with this. Like, this is not the church I grew up in. This is so different. This is not, this ain't it. Like, that's like, this ain't it. Like, I don't know what's going on. These people are crazy. They all talk weird. They all dress weird. And it was the 90s, so, and it was pre-internet. And I felt like everybody dressed like it was 10 years before. It was just weird. It was like everything was different. So I ended up just deciding to, at the end of the semester, I'm done. We just kind of floated back and forth from Utah to Iowa I was just so lost. And then I ended up moving to Salt Lake City, and I was there for a few years, and, kind of fell in with a crowd. I had never been exposed to certain things, especially like the gay crowd and all of that. And I was, living with my best friend who was gay and who would go into gay bars and just doing all of it, and it was fun for me because you could just go dance with your best friend. And that was fun. Like, I'd been there for, 4 years or something, and my life was on a fast track to going nowhere besides, party girl. And that was not what I wanted to be. And so I ended up coming back to Iowa and going back to school. I wasn't too far where I was going to school from, like, my hometown. And during that time, my brother died by suicide. And this was my brother who was 4 years younger than me. And I was very, very, very close with him.
Oh my gosh.
But that just pulled the rug out from underneath me. My mental health, I call the year after that like my mulligan year. Nothing counts that happened during that time. But I was just like completely self-destructive. And I ended up in the hospital and decided, okay, I need to get my life back together again. And so I decided to go to the University of Iowa and go to school there. Well, I was there for 2 weeks probably, and I ended up meeting my future husband in a bar, of all places. People ask us that now. We'll be at like steak meetings, and they're like, where'd you guys meet? And we're like, well, fun fact,
A bar.
a bar in Iowa City. And I'm not going to hide from that because it's a part of our story. And my husband was raised in a completely different world than me. He was raised in a same-sex family. He had 2 moms growing up. He had just gotten back from Iraq when I met him. So he, just home. He was interesting. I didn't get sick of him really fast, which was like a shock for me because normally that was my MO back then. Just like, okay, you're dumb. And I'm like, I'm ready to move on. Like, I remember the first time I met his mom, I watched how he treated her, and that spoke to me. There was something there that was different. And I actually got pregnant with my oldest child. We had him, and it's one of those things, having a child like gets you to realize the world is bigger than you. And all of a sudden I wanted to put this little thing in front of me. Like I wanted to protect him with everything that I had. We moved at that point to northern Iowa. And life was hard. That was just a really, really hard time of both of our lives. We moved back to southern Iowa in 2011, but we just sold our house up there a couple of years ago and going back up to the house to get it ready to sell and stuff. When you go back to a space or a place that you revisit, which was a really difficult time of your life. And of course, my husband was really struggling with mental health. And I think I was trying to find peace in every place that I could. And I got pregnant with my second child. And I found a really good therapist. And for the first time, I went and started talking to somebody. And I remember at one point she said to me, I think you need to go back to the faith that you were raised in. And I was like, ew, no, that's not happening, because it wasn't like I was ever against the church. It wasn't that. Even at that point in my life, I didn't understand the atonement of Jesus Christ. I didn't understand what it meant to have a personal relationship with Jesus. I didn't understand any of that. What I thought was, it's judgmental, and I want no part of that. But my mother, who is one of the most amazing missionaries that you will ever meet. I mean, right now she's in Eastern Kentucky because she kind of put herself on a mission. She's like to listen, like she doesn't like to have rules, so she wants to do it her way. So like my parents legit right now live out there because that's where she grew up, and so she could tell they needed help. During all of this time, my mom prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed for me, and I know she did. And she would call me and she would start talking, and I would legit set the phone down and be like, okay, enough. She just wanted so badly for me to find the peace that she could see that I needed. And so, doing a little bit of healing without the Savior in my life, and I mean a little, it started my healing journey. I will say that it did. It definitely did it. And I also was working with a very, very good clinician. And I know that she changed my life. She said some hard things to me. Whether or not I was ready to hear it then, eventually I was ready to hear it. My husband miraculously, weirdly, got a job offer. And so, if you think about the state of Iowa, which, kind of looks like this, we were clear up here. I grew up like clear down here. And so, like 260 miles or so. And he got a job offer because he worked in the wind industry. He says, well, I got this job offer, but it's in Missouri. And I'm like, oh, where in Missouri? And he says, Tarkio. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I laughed because I was like, that's like 20 miles from where I grew up. And he's like, oh, it's near your family. And we're both kind of like, oh. And he loved my family. It wasn't that. My family's a lot. He only has one brother. That's it. And a mom. That's all. And I have 8 siblings. And, so it's loud and it's a lot, lots of nieces and nephews and all the things. So he's like, oh gosh, okay. But it was a really good job offer. So we took it and we moved back. And I was pregnant with our 3rd child at that point. This job ended up not being at all what it was supposed to, and it was just a very poorly run site. He just kind of walked into a mess, and he ended up losing his job after we'd been there for about a year and a half. And during that time, my brother got called as the bishop. I was devastated by this job loss because it's like, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to have to move again. At this point, I was kind of liking being there because I'm with my sisters. The kids are with their cousins, and it was pretty awesome. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And I was angry. I was very angry. I remember I was mad. And my brother, who I love so much, he came to my house during this, and he looked at me and he had tears in his eyes. And he looked at me and he says, Marcy, your boys deserve to know Jesus. And you know that they deserve that. I looked at him back, and even with the emotion that he's bringing to me, and I could feel the love from him. It was almost tangible. I was like, I want nothing to do with that. That church, everybody's judgmental. I'm just giving the whole spiel. And he looks at me again, and he's like, what are you talking about? Who? Give me examples. And I'm like, and I can't even really think of anything at this point. He's like, why do you even say that? And I'm like, I don't know. And of course, it made me reflect. But in that moment, I'm just kind of sitting there like, whatever. And I'm sure he stayed, and I'm sure he said more things. I don't know. It got me thinking. And I really was trying to shut that off. And I was a stay-at-home mom, and I was just doing my thing. I don't know, maybe a couple weeks passed, and it was a Sunday morning. And then I think I was just doing my normal thing with the kids or whatever. And I swear it could have been out loud. I know that it wasn't, but it was so powerful. And I know for some people, it's like those gentle things. I very rarely get gentle reminders or gentle pushes because I don't know if I just don't listen well, I don't think. So for me, the Holy Ghost is like, I got to hit Marcy over the head because she doesn't listen. I was sitting there and I just got this very, very strong impression, like, get your boys. And at this point I had a baby. 6, 3, and 1, I don't know, and get your boys and go to church. And I was like, ooh. I'm like, ew, no, like legit, like, ew. I don't even have a dress to wear, I think, when I want to. Like, no, I'm not going. Like, I don't know. In my mind, I was like flooded with all of these memories of times when I'd been warned and I didn't listen, including the day that my brother died by suicide. And it was very, very powerful. And then it was again, like, get your boys and go to church. And of course, at that point, then I had to listen to that. I knew, okay, I just got warned. I got warned. I start getting dressed. I'm getting the boys ready. And my husband's like, what are you doing? And I said, I'm going to church. And he's like, I knew this was going to happen when we moved here. And he was like, don't expect me to come with you. I'm not going to that crazy cult. Like, I want nothing to do with it. And I was like, I don't care. I'm not doing this for you. That's fine. And so I get the kids and I get dressed and I walk in the door. And the first person I see is D. Nix, Sister Nix, which was my young women's president that I talked about earlier.
Oh my gosh.
And she sees me and she grabs me and hugs me and is so much love. And there was other leaders there. I grew up there, you know, everyone just loving on me and like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're here. And I go in and I sit down, I kind of get myself together, and I had this overwhelming sense of God saying to me, I need you here. This is where I need you. There was a part of me that was like, I don't want to. I don't want to. But God was like, you know, it was, I need you here. So then there were stake speakers that week. So they were there and they were speaking, and it was a couple, they had gone through this job loss, and how that had brought them closer to the Lord, and how that struggle had impacted them and what they went through in it. And it was so amazing. First time in a long time where I was like, wow, you know, God was completely aware of me and knew what I needed to hear. I knew that I needed to be there to hear what they had to say. You know, I'm ready to leave at that point. But my sister-in-law, Amy, she ushers me, and she's like this little tiny, like, ginger, and she's very quiet. She's the opposite of my family. And she married into this loud, crazy family. And she's not one to ever push or, you know, say too much. But she just kind of gently was like, come to Relief Society with me. And I was like, okay. She's like, the kids will be fine. And of course, and they were. And I go to Relief Society, and I don't know what they were talking about. I don't remember. But I do remember the last song being Because I Have Been Given Much, and just ugly crying through it. It's not, I mean, just all of it. But it wasn't like all of my whole testimony came back. It doesn't work that way. And wasn't like automatically I understood Christ's atonement. Having to talk to your brother, and that was part of it too, you know?
Yeah, I imagine.
Because he told me, he's like, you know, look, if this is uncomfortable for you to like talk to me about all of this, you can speak to somebody from the stake. And I was like, no, I feel like God needs for me to talk to you. Like, I felt like that was part of my process. Like, no, you get to talk to your brother. But it was actually really good because he's always met me with so much love. But it was really cool for me to see him in that way too, where he completely taught me about what forgiveness looks like and what it means and how much love Jesus has for all of us. And it was so, so powerful to get that from him, because I don't know that I could have been quite as broken around somebody else. It had to be him, you know, it had to be my brother. So ironically, immediately I get a calling, because, you know, when you're in a tiny ward, like you usually have numerous callings, in fact. So they're like, well, we're going to have you teach primary. And I'm like, okay. And it was like the valiant voice. And it was like half of them were my nephews, and they were jerks. You know, they just were turds. It was like this unruly class that nobody else could handle. And so I'm like, I got this, you know. Well, and it was Doctrine and Covenants. And that's what we were teaching. And it was it was exactly what I needed. I remember reading this stuff. These are things that I grew up learning about. You know, I'm reading about Joseph Smith, and I'm reading about the first vision, and I'm reading about Elijah, and I'm, you know, coming in and restoring the priesthood. And I remember each week saying, I have to get on my knees and pray, because I will not teach. I will not be a hypocrite. I will not teach these kids something that I don't believe myself. And so every week I would read the lesson and go through it and be like, I need you to show me. I need to feel this. And so it was a really, really cool way to regain the testimony that I had just let go of, specifically because, I mean, I was really starting to understand Jesus. And I felt that the restoration was a different piece of it, right? And so for me anyway, and maybe that's different for other people. And then about 6 months later, my old Young Women's president got called to be the Young Women's president again. But guess who she called her counselor this time?
I think I know.
Yes, it was a full circle moment. And I think we all cried together, and it was pretty awesome. And then my husband, that whole journey was something different. Like you could see it happening like on the outside of him. And he had a lot of anger in him and a lot of, his own demons. And he'll tell you this. Like, the only thing I ever knew about Mormons is what I saw in South Park.
And that's valid. That's valid.
Right. And then he's like, and all I knew about Christians really was what I had been taught growing up. Christians are judgmental, they're awful, terrible kind of things. And so he had no foundation of understanding. Most people, I think, have at least a kind of an understanding of Jesus. Eventually, he started to come to church with me sometimes. And it was kind of awful at first because he would be like muttering things under his breath. And he called Fast and Testimony meeting open mic night at the LDS church, like what he called it. He hated it. His journey was really kind of interesting because he went from nothing to do with it to letting the missionaries teach him, but then asking so many questions, like just beating them to death, and then being like, okay, like I'm good. I've heard everything that you have to teach. And then it was like, I don't really want the missionaries coming here anymore. It's like, okay, that's fine. But then we got this missionary. His name is Elder Wallace. And this kid, Gordon is his first name, Gordon Wallace. He is one of the most amazing human beings. And he was so happy. He just had this joy that I think was contagious. And my husband was like, I cannot be mean to this kid. I just can't do it. He's so nice. And so it went from, okay, I'm going to teach him how to play cards. I'm going to teach him cards. And then, he'd be like, well, can I give you a message? And it just went from that to Kyle's heart, my husband, just very slowly being softened. And he tells the story as one day he was sitting outside and he would occasionally smoke cigars, but he would never do it in front of our kids because he didn't want them to know that he did that. Mm-hmm. So he's like hiding. So he's like hiding out back, smoking this cigar. And this is where, people, when they say you have to be a certain place, like blah, 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 or the spirit can't reach you. I'm like, wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. Because like the Lord will reach you where you are.
Yep.
And suggest somehow that you're supposed to have it all figured out before he reaches you is absurd. And so my husband's outside smoking a cigar and he's thinking, and he's told me, I was thinking about how ridiculous all this is. Like this 14-year-old boy, like what? Like this is all crazy. Like none of this could possibly have happened. Like this is all crazy. Mm-hmm. The strongest impression came over him and it was like, why not? Why couldn't I do this?
Wow.
And so then he's told me something changed in me where it was like, I started to look at it more open. Well, okay, why not? Why couldn't this happen? And let my heart be softened to allow God to speak to me. And it didn't take too long after that. He took the lessons. And I mean, there's a couple of like, I don't know, like I might, my oldest son at this point was getting ready to be 8 years old. And my husband knew that at 8 years old, they get baptized. And he had this very strong impression that was something that he was supposed to do as a father. And so growing up without a father, he's very sensitive to making sure that he does the things that fathers are supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was how the Lord was able to reach him, was through his love for his children. You might not understand all of this yet, but I'm showing you that your role for him will be to take him into that water. Back then, we had gospel principles, and he would be like, I'm not going to this class anymore. And I'd say, well, why? And he's like, because every time I go, I learn more about what I'm doing wrong, and I'm kind of sick of that. I mean, he was kidding, but yeah, he just had some really great men around him. So then he's working for my brother, which worked out pretty well too, because he had lost. And so my brother had to work for him, and the catalyst, honestly, for me to go back to school and finish my education and just do everything. It's kind of crazy how looking back, like, okay, this all needed to be. Before my husband joined the church, and even before I went back to Jesus and like found my faith again, we had made the decision after baby number 3 that like no more babies.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had a vasectomy, and, we were done. He got baptized on my mother's birthday, which my husband has a very unique relationship with my family. It's actually kind of beautiful. He doesn't look at my siblings or my parents like they are his, and he is theirs. So he got baptized on my mom's birthday, and then we were sealed as a family 1 year later in 2014. And while we were at the temple, it was really cool because we had to have our kids were all born, and so we're kneeling across the altar from each other, and the kids are in there, and it's all so amazing. We both got this overwhelming impression, which of course we didn't realize that we were both feeling this, that our family wasn't done. We were not, our family. So I waited a little bit, and then I said something to him, and he's like, oh my gosh, like, no, I felt that too. He said, because how are we going to do that? And I'm like, this timing is terrible. I'm in grad school, like, oh, okay. But then I was just like, hey, I'm going to trust you, Lord. I'm going to trust that everything is going to work out and it's going to be fine. And so he did the reversal, and, they were telling us, okay, well, if it works, you can expect a pregnancy, but between 6 and 18 months. And I'm like, perfect, I'll be done. 6 weeks later, I'm pregnant. And
oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. You're like, surprise.
Yes. And so we have my daughter in 2016. I was really struggling. And I was like, is this postpartum? Of course, I'm diagnosing myself because as a clinician, it's like, okay, maybe I've got postpartum depression. I was so tired, but it was like a next level kind of tired. And I kept going to the doctor, and they're like, yeah, it's probably postpartum. And, well, 5 months after she was born, I had a cardiac arrest in my sleep.
Oh my gosh.
And my husband, which is crazy because he could sleep through like the atomic bomb going off, and he woke up, and for whatever reason, he's told me, he's like, it was like I was immediately awake. So, someone woke him up, right? Like he would, and it wasn't just a little bit awake. It was like I was wide awake. And he's like, for some reason, I thought to look over at you. And he nudged me and is like, are you okay? Or Marcy. And I didn't respond. And he thought it was funny. So he goes into the bathroom and gets water on his hands and like comes back and does, one of those. And then this is like 1 o'clock in the morning or something. And I didn't respond. And he knew that normally I don't like getting woken up, and he knows that. So because I didn't rage at him, his stomach just dropped, and he's like, I knew something was wrong. And then he realized I wasn't breathing. He said his first thought was to kneel by the bed and pray. And then he called 911 first, but he didn't think to start CPR on me, which is kind of funny. I tease him about that a little bit. Yeah, like he's like, I just thought I need to go move the coffee table out of the way in the front room, and I need to make sure they can get back here easily. And he thought if she's dead, like she would have wet her pants. And I had, of course, wet the bed. And like, that's just part of it, I guess. And so they get there and they start working on me, and they're in there working on me for a very long time. Like they ended up, I think, having to shock me 7 times.
Oh my gosh.
They drill into your bone marrow to give you medication to try and start your heart. But then when they finally got a pulse, I aspirated. And so then
oh my gosh,
shut down. So, of course, being in a rural area, they were very, very worried to be able to get me to Omaha. And the cloud cover was too low, so they couldn't life flight, and they just didn't think I was going to make it on an ambulance. This is also the benefit of having a small town. So the nurse that was working that night, of course, knows my family. And the first call that Kyle made was to my brother. And they came and they gave me a blessing. I believe that I was healed in that moment because I got to Omaha, and of course my family's all there, and they're telling my family it's not good. If she ever wakes up from this, she will never be the same. Like she will never be the person that you once knew, and just really preparing them. And then like a day later, they go to my husband and they say, well, she's getting better and we don't know why. I was in a coma for about a week. My experience of what I saw and what I felt on the other side of the veil, my brother, who And this is something, and the reason I thought about telling this was because I think that anybody that's family has experienced suicide, there's so many things out there where misconceptions, misunderstandings, where is my family member, my loved one, where are they? And I believe, and I think God showed me this. My brother, he was only 17 when he died by suicide, and he had struggled with his mental health. I mean, I realize now as a clinician how rare it is to have that level of depression at such a young age. He suffered. He greeted me on the other side. He was there, and he was so happy in a way that on this earth, I never saw that in him. I don't believe that it was God's will that he do what he did. I don't believe that. I believe that if he would have turned to the right places, he could have, but it doesn't matter. God understood his struggle, and he was happy. I want to share this because we had some conversations. One thing I've never shared with anyone, now I do share. He said to me, see, Marcy, it's real.
Mm.
And I knew he wasn't talking about heaven. He was talking about our temple covenants. And I knew it.
Oh my gosh, that just gives me chills.
That's what he was talking. That's what he meant. And
Wow.
I had not told anyone this. And my mother was in the temple and she saw my brother and he said that to her. See,
Oh my gosh.
that it's real. She told me this. And I said, Mom, that's one of the things that he said to me that I hadn't told anyone. So then it made me realize I need to speak to that. I need to tell people that. There's other things that I experienced that I won't talk about, but that is one thing that, people need to know. He wasn't talking about heaven. He wasn't talking about the spirit world. He was talking about our temple covenants.
Wow.
And I don't know why I've had the experiences that I've had. I will say this, after my situation, so I woke up from my coma. I'm intubated. I'm hooked to 8 million things. I can't speak. And my husband and my sister are in there. And my sister and I have this really close connection. We're 2 years apart and we've always done everything. My husband says it's not even fair when we play games because he's like, I'll be like, that thing. And she knows. So I'm trying to communicate with my sister and I'm getting more and more angry because she should know what I'm trying to ask what happened. And they're saying all these other things that he's like, you're okay, it's all right. And I'm getting more and more angry laying there in that bed. I think I was even tied down maybe a little bit. So I flipped off my sister. They both start bawling because it was in that moment they knew I was all.
They're like, she's back. She is back.
I'm trying to communicate with you. You're saying these stupid things. Like, what's wrong with
I love that.
2 years after that, my sister lost a child. Lost a baby. He lived to be 3 weeks old, and that was really tough. And then we lost another nephew in an accident. He was hiking in Utah, actually. He was 13, and we went through that. And then I lost another brother. He was 38. So all within a very short time frame after my cardiac arrest.
Wow.
I say to everyone, I'm like, I was given that so that we could have comfort and we could have peace, knowing that it's going to be okay. If it doesn't feel okay right now, it will feel okay eventually. And we can trust that and find peace in Christ and find peace in what we know and what we've been given. After my cardiac arrest, I struggled immensely with feelings of guilt. There was a big part of me that I didn't want to come back, okay? Mm-hmm. Given the choice, I don't think people make the choice to come back because what you experience and feel there is not you can't even put words to it. This isn't home. And I felt guilt over those feelings of longing for that. I ordered a book and it was written by President Nelson and it's about death. And in that book, he's talking about, I think it was President either Joseph Fielding Smith, maybe, or Joseph F. Smith. Anyway, he had experiences where in his dreams, he got to go and visit the spirit world. And he was talking about how he didn't want to come back. And it was the first time that I was like, oh my gosh, if a prophet felt this, it's okay that I felt it. It's okay that I have that struggle. I know I'm needed here. It's not that I was ever in doubt of that, how much my kids need me and how much I'm needed. It was the first time I felt completely understood in that struggle.
Wow.
I'm grateful that we got to have that, because I do think that it's given, especially my mother, who has now lost 2 grandchildren and 2 sons. And I mean, her faith could never be shaken in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
I think it's given her peace.
How do you navigate with so much loss that you've experienced? As a therapist, I'm sure you have an interesting perspective with navigating grief and loss. Obviously, having that eternal perspective that you have now from the experiences you've had is so incredible and such a gift. But what about for people who, they haven't had that experience and they feel lost and they feel like they are just wading through this darkness because they've lost somebody close to them? What advice would you give to them?
I don't give a lot of advice. It's not my superpower, really. I do a lot of grief work, and I think it's very important to feel what you feel. But then I think that it's also important to know what you know and not let one or the other kind of overpower the other. There's balance in that. And I think grief can be one of those things where our feelings can totally get a hold of us and take us down a dark path. But when we kind of bring in, what do I know? What has God shown me? What do I know? And even if it's just like a spark. So if it's someone that doesn't have a lot of faith, or somebody that but I always talk about that. So I'm in my office right now. I've got a picture of the Savior in my office. Like, nobody's going to tell me that
I love
that's
that.
and most of the people I work with, though, like I don't work with people that are LDS very often, or I don't know if I ever have, maybe one, but I work with so many people of different faiths, but most people have a belief. They know there's something more. And I will always, especially if I'm doing grief work, we lean into that. It's like, well, tell me what you do believe. Tell me what you do know. Allow your spirit to be comforted in that way. Obviously, I don't tell my whole story to people that come. It's not the place, but I'm very comfortable with sitting with any amount of grief, probably because of what I've gone through. I can tell you, though, the difference between having the Lord as my companion with the losses that I've experienced and the ones that I have experienced without the Lord right next to me, opening the door and allowing him in, night and day. Nothing brings you peace the way that Jesus does. Nothing. There's nothing in this world that can be a substitute for that. And even people that, no matter what faith background they come from, I'm talking about Jesus in my office every day. Like, let me be very clear. On an intake, I'm always asking, like, tell me about your spirituality. What does that look like? We're in the Midwest. Most people identify as some kind of Christian. So I lean into that with them. And my hope is to bring them closer to Christ, regardless of what that looks like for them. Jesus loves all of his children. That's part of it, is helping them to experience what that feels like to be comforted in that way. Because most people, myself included, like, I don't think that I knew what it was like to have a personal relationship with Christ until I was older.
Yeah, man, I agree with that. It's crazy how sometimes in our hardest trials, those are our most spiritual experiences. And when you're going through something like that, it's like the veil is just so thin. And even though it's such a hard thing, it's such a sacred thing.
Sometimes you step back a minute and you're like, wow, the gift of hindsight, right? We can see how the Lord carried us through situations, or we can see, oh, I needed to go through that so that I could learn. And I remember one time someone saying this to me, and man, did it make me mad. After my brother had died by suicide, I had someone say to me, someday you're going to be able to use this for good. And boy, did that make me mad. I was so mad. How dare you? How dare you say that to me? You have no idea what I'm feeling. You have no idea. There's nothing good that could ever come from this. There is nothing good. That just felt so cruel at the time. And now I laugh about that because it's so true. There has been good that when you can understand where someone is sitting, you may not know their exact, you don't have to walk in their shoes, but when you can kind of put yourself there because of the experiences that you've had, and you can really hold that space for them, is so, so powerful. And it's very important, I think, to remind yourself of that. That's why in the scriptures, I think it says, like, remember, remember, remember. You got to remember how he's taking you out of all of these situations, even if you weren't open to it at the time, maybe. But you can look back usually and see it and see God's hand, even if you weren't noticing it at the time.
Mm-hmm. I
I
love
don't know.
that. That is so beautiful. Marcy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And thank you so much for being so vulnerable and sharing your story. And man, I just felt the spirit so much talking to you. And I'm just so moved by your story and your experience. It's crazy. I just heard this story last night that was really heartbreaking. And it was in my 12-step meeting. So I'm not going to share it. But this just comes so like at the perfect time for me, and I'm sure a lot of listeners. It's such a needed story. And I have this appointment to go with my husband to the temple tomorrow, and I'm so excited because see, it's real.
I
That I'm
yes,
just never gonna forget that when I'm in the temple now.
I love what you're doing, Ashley. I love this. I love the idea of sharing. I think our stories are so much more similar than they are different. The things that we feel, the things we experience, especially when we feel all alone. It's so cool to be able to talk about that and to be open and real with people and realize that like there is nobody sitting in those pews
That's
that hasn't,
perfect. Yep.
right? Like we're all there because we need Jesus. Otherwise, what would be the point?
Right.
That's literally the whole point.
Yep.
And so I love you have created this space to talk about, okay, how did I make my way back? Like, I love it. So thank you. Thank you. And thank you for giving me the opportunity. It's lovely to meet you.
It was so good to meet you too, and thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
A lot of people have asked us how they can support the podcast, and we have created a Comeback Podcast merch line on our website, www.comebackpodcast.org. All of the money made from the merch goes right back into the podcast. So if you are interested in supporting the podcast and you want to purchase some merch, we would love it. Check it out. Thank you so much for being a supporter of the Comeback Podcast and listening to our episodes. It would mean so much to us if you would like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It helps other people be able to find us, and we want to share this message to everyone.